More Stories from Grandma's Attic by Arleta Richardson, illustrated by Dora. Chapter 11. Charlotte. "Grandma!" I wailed. "Look what happened to Virginia!" I held up my doll so Grandma could see how her leg had come away from her body. "Can she be fixed?" Grandma examined the doll carefully. "I should think so. I imagine your Uncle Roy can mend her. Ask him when he comes in." I sat on the steps and waited for Uncle Roy to come from the barn. As soon as he appeared, I rushed to meet him. "Grandma says you can fix Virginia, Uncle Roy. Will you try, please?" Uncle Roy sat down and looked at the dangling leg.
"I think a new piece of wire will take care of that. I'll fix it for you right after dinner."
He turned the doll over and laughed.
"They sure don't make dolls like they used to. I remember a doll baby your grandma had."
"Was it Emily?" I asked.
"Mercy," Uncle Roy replied. "I don't know what she called it. I remember that I called it a mess, and so did Ma."
At the dinner table that night, I questioned Grandma. "What doll did you have that your mother and Uncle Roy thought was a mess?" Grandma thought for a moment. "You must mean Charlotte. I'd almost forgotten about her. How did you remember, Roy?"
"I was with you when you found it," Uncle Roy said. "I tried to discourage you from taking it home, but you wouldn't listen to me."
"That's right. You were there, weren't you? I wonder why Ma ever let me into the house with it."
"Because you were spoiled," Uncle Roy said, and he winked at me.
"What was the matter with it?" I asked. "Why shouldn't you bring it into the house?"
"Well," Grandma said, "it was a mess. No one in the family had anything good to say about it, but I thought any doll was lovable."
"Where did you find it?" I asked. Grandma got up to clear the table and began the story. "It was a rainy spring day in my first year of school. Roy and I were walking home together through the woods. I was lagging behind, as usual, and Roy had stopped to tell me to hurry up. He didn't particularly like having his little sister tagging along, but he was responsible for me, so he didn't dare let me out of his sight. "Come on, Mabel," he said. "You can walk faster than that. I've got chores to do before I can play, just because you never have to do anything." "I do so," I retorted. "I help Ma set the table, and I dry the knives and forks." Roy snorted and turned to walk on. "Wait a minute, Roy. Look at this." Reluctantly, he came back to where I stood.
"Well, what is it?"
I bent over to pick something out of the mud. It was a doll, soaked almost beyond recognition. The features were nearly gone, and the clothes were torn and dripping. But to my motherly eye, it was beautiful. I hugged it to me as Roy watched in disgust.
"Ugh," he groaned. "Throw it back. That's awful. Wait until Ma sees what you've gotten all over your front."
I looked down and saw that I had ruined my dress. Mud and water were soaking through my apron. I knew that Ma would not be pleased about that, but I couldn't throw the doll back. "I'll take it home and clean it up," I said. "See, I'll hold it way out here." I held the doll at arm's length and began to run for home.
"It's too late to hold it way out there,"
Roy called after me.
"You're already a mess. If I were you, I'd chuck that thing in the nearest hole."
I ignored him and continued on my way. When I ran into the kitchen, Ma was horrified. "Oh, Mabel! What happened to you? Did you fall down, and what is that?" "It's a doll, Ma. I found it in the woods and brought it home to take care of it. It just needs to be washed a little."
"It needs to be buried," Roy said. "I told her to leave it there, but she wouldn't listen."
He put his lunch pail on the table. "Where is your lunch pail, Mabel?" Ma asked. "Did you leave it at school again?" "No. I had it when I left school. I must have laid it down on the road when I stopped to pick up the doll." Ma sighed. "Go back and get her lunch pail, Roy. I don't have anything else she can carry her lunch in."
"Oh, Ma! Why can't she go back for it? It's her pail."
Ma looked at Roy. "I guess I can put her lunch in with yours. You'll have to eat with her tomorrow."
I'll go."
"And you," Ma said to me, "take that filthy thing out and wash it in the trough. Then come back and change your clothes." I knew then that Ma would let me keep the doll, but I didn't know what a surprise was in store for us. I hurried outside and swished it around in the water until most of the mud was gone, then brought it back to the kitchen.
She's awfully heavy, Ma, but I couldn't get any more water out. Put it on the back of the stove to dry and change your dress. You're a sight.
When Reuben came in with a load of wood, he poked a finger into the doll. "What's this?" he asked Ma.
It's Mabel's doll. She found it on her way home from school.
"What's it stuffed with? Rocks?"
It's waterlogged, Ma replied. It won't be that stiff when it dries out.
By the time Pa came in for supper, the doll had begun to smell musty.
"Phew!"
Pa's face twisted in mock disgust.
"What smells like an old burlap bag? I hope it's not what we're having for supper."
Hardly, Ma answered. It's Mabel's doll. It will probably take all night to dry out.
Several more comments were made about that doll before I went to bed. Roy offered it a decent burial, and Reuben declared that he wouldn't touch it with a stick. Pa thought he'd better sit on the porch after supper and air out, since he smelled like a burlap bag himself after sitting by the stove. I didn't think any of them were very funny.
Ma, you won't let anyone touch my doll, will you? No, of course not. You get on to bed now. I'm going to name her Charlotte. Don't you think that's a pretty name? Lovely. Now go to bed.
Sometime later that evening, Pa and the boys were sitting in the kitchen. Pa was reading and the boys were doing their homework. Ma came in and found Reuben staring strangely at the stove. "Ma, something's the matter with that doll."
Is it burning?
Ma said as she ran over to the stove. "No, but I think it's alive." Pa looked up from his book.
"Thy learning is turning thee mad," he teased.
"He's crazy," Roy added. Suddenly, an arm jerked up. Then one of the legs kicked out. Ma jumped back from the stove.
Mercy! What's going on?
As they watched, the doll became more lively. The head bobbed and the arms and legs flopped wildly.
"Throw it on the floor,"
Pa ordered.
Jump on it!
Roy shouted. Ma gingerly picked up the doll and dropped it on the table, where it continued to toss and turn in a most lifelike way. "At least it's beginning to smell better," Reuben said. "It smells almost like popcorn."
It
"Is popcorn!" Ma exclaimed. "That's what it's stuffed with." And sure enough, that's exactly what was in it. After the doll stopped jumping, Ma ripped it open and dumped out the corn. Pa looked at the mess distastefully. "That old rag isn't worth stuffing again, is it?"
No,
Ma admitted.
it isn't. But I promised Mabel I wouldn't let anyone touch her doll, so I'll have to put something in it.
"Fill it with catnip," Reuben suggested. "Maybe the cat will drag it off and lose it." "Nah," said Roy. "Put pepper in it. Then Mabel will be glad to get rid of it." But Ma was more sympathetic.
If this old rag makes Mabel happy, then she can have it. I'll wash it up and fill it with rice.
And that's what she did. I played with Charlotte for a long while. Grandma looked at my doll, which Uncle Roy had mended as he listened to the story. "You're right. They don't make dolls like they used to." End of chapter 11.